This week on Young Rock, Election Day is finally here, but based on past experiences, candidate Johnson isn't declaring victory just yet. We're talking Young Rock Season 1, Episode 11 on Pro Wrestling Repackaged. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chris.
And my name is Tessa.
And this is Pro Wrestling Repackaged, where the squared circle meets the small screen. This week, we are discussing Season 1, Episode 11 of Young Rock, Election Day, the finale of Young Rock Season 1. But before we dive in, we've got a lot of ground to cover because it has been a very newsworthy week. Really, right after we recorded last week, it became very newsworthy, and I guess the first big news item is that Young Rock has officially been renewed for a second season.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And The Rock has already kind of promised us some very important parts of his life, namely Flex Kavana.
Flex Kavana. Now, I hope he knows what he did just there, because when you say those two words, you have to deliver on Flex Kavana. That's not something he can just throw out there. So I am just wildly excited with the possibilities for where we could be going in Season 2.
He specifically said, Season 2, here we come. And hello, Mr. Flex Kavana. We've been expecting you.
Hello, indeed. I think if we get some Flex Kavana action, I think that we will see an uptick in the interest from wrestling fans all across the board. So it'll be very interesting to see when Season 2 premieres, if more people have gravitated towards the show, if it is available in places like the UK. I know yesterday I was talking with our friend Duncan from the Then Now Whatever podcast, and he's like, yeah, I've been listening along, but we still can't watch the show in the UK because it hasn't been picked up anywhere. So hopefully they get on that. I know that it has been picked up in Australia by this point. So hopefully it is available internationally so the audience can grow and more people can enjoy the delight that is Young Rock, and hopefully, get some Flex Kavana action in Season 2. So we are very excited about that. We have also renewed ourselves for a second season. More on that much later in the show. We will talk about that towards the end, but some other exciting news concerns one of the cast members of Young Rock, and that is that Uli Latukefu has joined the cast of The Rock's upcoming DC film, Black Adam, which I was very excited to see because, and we talked about this a few episodes ago, it seems like this is Uli's breakout role. Now, he's no spring chicken, as listeners have pointed out. He's not young, and we still think of him as very young in his career because he hasn't done much that has obviously crossed over here to the United States, but this is a big role for him. And this is also a sign that The Rock is going to be sort of a champion for the people that he cast in this show. I would imagine that we're going to see them collaborate with The Rock on other projects, and this is the first instance of that with Uli joining Black Adam.
The Rock's really playing like Big Brother here to like help all these guys out, so then I'm just like, what character is Uli going to play? Because he plays The Rock so well, I imagine he's got to be related to him in this movie.
Well, that'll be interesting. We don't know yet at this point who he has been cast as. We don't know the role that he will be playing in Black Adam, but that would be pretty funny if he was just playing young Black Adam. Like whatever the movie The Rock's in, the Tooth Fairy, he plays young Tooth Fairy.
He's just got them on like retainer, ready to go.
Get that Tooth Fairy sequel ready to go. Play young Joe Kingman in the Game Plan 2. That would be very funny. But no, congratulations to Uli. I'm obviously glad to see him sign on for a project that I will be watching and paying attention to. So that's very exciting. So, and I can only hope the same for the rest of the main cast. They have been just brilliant in their roles and very well cast shows we've talked about. And hopefully we will all see them go on to do many other things other than Young Rock. But I'm glad that we'll see them all again in Season 2 as well, because, I really have come to really love this cast, especially the Johnson family. I just think they're so great. But along with all of that, along with all of the Young Rock related news, we also have some news related to another wrestling show that is on the horizon and is approaching quickly, and that is Heels, the upcoming Starz wrestling drama starring Stephen Amell, we now have not only a release date, but its first trailer as well. And we know that it will premiere now on Sunday, August 15th, of course, on Stars. And we will be covering heels, but it's not the next thing we'll be covering. So stay tuned to the end for that. The first trailer released, as we mentioned, and I thought it was very interesting. I am curious. I'm not going to say one way or the other that this is going to be an amazing show or it's going to be awful or whatever. Opinions on the internet just have to be one extreme or the other, and I'm still in wait and see mode because we've seen very little at this point.
I do think this is something that wrestling fans might attach themselves more to than Young Rock. And part of that is because CM Punk is in this.
Right.
And so I think people are going to be really interested to see him play a wrestler.
I am very interested to see CM Punk. This will be my first time really seeing CM Punk in an acting role. I know he's done some horror movies and things like that. Nothing I've really been paying attention to, but I'm excited to see that. More than anything, though, I'm just excited that Stephen Amell is involved because he definitely is someone that I really have an affinity for after being a big fan of Arrow for many years. And of course, wrestling fans, he has some cachet with them as well. He did the match with Stardust in WWE. He was on All In. So I'd be interested to see if maybe there's some AEW tie-ins with heels. It's not like it's on HBO Max or anything. It's not like on a Warner platform, but I'd be interested to see because he does have that strong tie with Cody and with the Elite, as it were. So as I said, we will be covering heels, but it is not the next thing we are covering, so stay tuned for that. But with all of that news, it is now time for us to get into our final, at least for season 1, edition of The Rock Says.
The Rock says, The Rock says.
What's The Rock saying?
What do you got this week?
So I don't think I usually go to 1987 for my picks, but this time I did. And I chose when Dwayne is just ragging on Kevin, our enemy. He says, "Father, forgive him because he's a Rudy Poo candy ass," which I just love. I love any time they bring in these classic Rock lines and that they just come into play into these episodes. I always have a fun time when those are brought up.
Especially in 87.
Yes.
Because it's just something else that creates a stronger tie to the guy that we know. It creates that tie. It's like you've said a million times, it's easier for Uli to portray a guy that we know as The Rock and really exude those qualities. But when we get to see Bradley or even Adrian do it, it always makes it a little bit more special and it gives them a little bit more to work with there. So I enjoyed that as well. My quote also comes from the very same scene, and it is also from Bradley. It's also from Teenage Dwayne. And my quote is, "I'm going to get into the NFL and be so rich that I could afford a robot maid like Rocky Balboa." Of course, referencing the famous Happy Birthday Paulie robot from Rocky IV, a classic moment in cinema history. So always love when they drop a little nugget like that.
And fine-ass Karen has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, do you think that she's seen Rocky IV? It's been out for about 2 years. You think she's seen that yet?
I just figured in the 80s, like everybody was watching that. I'm not familiar with it, so I'm Karen in this moment, but
I could see maybe the Karens being dragged to the theater to see it on a date night or something like that, but I don't know. I guess it's something that just is not on her radar at this point.
I feel like that's a moment that you don't really forget.
I forgive fine-ass Karen for not knowing it. I think Bonnie would have been tuned into it. She's tuned into a lot of things, as we see later on. But let's dive into the episode discussion. Season 1, Episode 11, Election Day, the Season 1 finale. And I can't believe that we are already here. But this episode was directed by Jeffrey Walker, written by Jeff Chiang and Nahnatchka Khan, just like the pilot, and it is basically the mirror image of the pilot, except on the other end of the season, because it is the same format as the pilot. But Tessa, why don't you tell us what happened in this episode?
So here we're on the heels of the 2032 election, which kind of shows that this episode title is wrong, because it is not Election Day. But The Rock is not counting his chickens just yet. Instead of writing his acceptance speech prematurely, he's sitting down to talk with Randall again, thank you, Randall, about 3 other times in his life where things didn't go exactly as he or his family planned.
So basically, this is just the bookend format that they'll do for all of the seasons, I would presume, where we start off with all 3 time periods and we end with all 3 time periods, which I think definitely makes it a lot easier. And it's not the only thing it has in common with the pilot. I thought that this was just as fun as the pilot, but where it goes a little bit deeper is that it hits the emotional beats so much better because we've been on this ride for the whole season with all 3 time periods and we're invested at this point. So we're invested, we're on the ride, and we got to wrap things up. So I thought it was a nice way to do it where everyone gets a time to shine. The only thing is that I felt as I was watching this, I loved seeing all 3 time periods in this episode, and I kind of wish that it was that way for the entire season, but I understand that that's not realistic. It becomes way harder to just tell a cohesive story that way, but it is nice to have them all coexist in one episode, so I am glad that they went that route for the finale.
I think what I like the most when they do an episode like this is that it just feels especially cohesive. Everything's in order. It seems really neat and tidy. And that's an issue that I've had with the overall season, is that they don't go in order. So you're kind of missing things and it gets a little muddled. But when they do an episode like this, it just feels really cohesive.
It really does get hard to sometimes keep track of where you are in the season because you'll see an 87 episode and then you don't see it again for 2 weeks. I think it would hold up better on a binge watch. And I think what we're going to do over the next week is I think we're going to binge watch the entire season, but we'll do it in chronological order. And that may not wind up working out very well, but I'm just curious to see if it works out well watching 82, 87, and then 90, 91, watching it all like that. So we're going to do that and then report back next week when we do our season 1 wrap up.
I think as long as you ignore the 2032 stuff, because that goes in order.
Right.
As long as you ignore that, I think it'll tell a much more coherent story. And we're not really paying attention to the 2032 stuff anyway, except when Randall's there.
Yes, Randall aside, we largely do ignore 2032. So I don't think that'll be as much of a problem for us. So we will report back next week, as I said. So that may yield some interesting results. We have yet to see. But we start with this episode, as we always do, with The Rock in 2032. And we have Randall again, because it just wouldn't be right without Randall to close off the season. At this point, I feel like they're best friends.
Yeah, I think they're besties. There's no doubting that. They're having too much fun together.
Like, they're definitely going to hang out regularly.
They're friends.
One way or the other after the election coverage, I feel like. You're going to have, if The Rock wins, you're going to have Randall taking frequent trips to the White House.
The Rock's probably going to go visit Randall and his chickens, because he has chickens.
He's got 4 chickens, yes. I love that. You live free, man.
Okay.
But we start off here and some disgusting behavior by The Rock right off the bat, singing Toby Keith on the campaign trail.
First of all, we have to address that The Rock is in the lead here in this election. It's 52% to 48%. And I do think that that has something to do with The Rock's choice of karaoke.
Yeah, he's still reeling from the cheesesteak scandal, and now he's pulling out Toby Keith. It really makes sense for The Rock to like Toby Keith. Boots to asses will put a boot in your ass. It's the American way. It really makes sense now. It all lines up when you think about it.
I mean, look, in the last episode, The Rock was, clearly in 1991 going to a Garth Brooks concert. This is the natural progression here.
I feel like Garth Brooks and Toby Keith, though, are just on 2 different planes.
Are they?
Toby Keith, my dad was listening to Toby Keith in the early 2000s, and whenever I was in the car with him, it was just, ugh.
Look, we had this album. We have this CD that he's singing, what is it, Who's Your Daddy?
First of all, when you say we, please don't, listeners, please don't confuse that as Tessa and I owning that album. It's her family. Her dad, her brother.
My dad.
I am not involved in this. Your dad? It's not your dad?
Not my dad. It's like Brandon. It's my brother Brandon. and mine and my mom's. Like that early 2000s, we were very into country music. So I'm very in tune with what The Rock is doing here.
The whole gist of this segment is that The Rock doesn't point to the scoreboard before the game is over, as he says.
Yeah, I really liked this lead-in to the young Rocks here. I think this is the most cohesive 2032 into leading up to these segments that we've seen so far. But I also really like this because, number one, it reminded me of wrestlers pointing to the WrestleMania sign when he says, I never point to that scoreboard until it's over. And I think that just would have been a funnier analysis for wrestling fans. But number two, I think this is the first chink in his armor, so to speak. We see him so confident all the time in 2032. But this is the first time we see him maybe a little bit unsure of himself. And I like seeing that side of him.
He gives us this quote that says, no matter what happens, whether I become president or not, I wanted to share some personal stories with people to show them that I understand where they're coming from because I've been there. I think that comes a little bit later in the episode, but that's kind of the whole mission statement for this show. It also seems like real life Dwayne Johnson talking to real life people because he's really going to run for president. And this is his way of getting people to know him on a personal level so he can do just that. This is reality now.
I don't.
I feel like every day I have a Google alert set up for Young Rock, and I feel like every day I'm seeing something about The Rock running for president, some quote that he said or some article being written about it. And yeah, that's the mission statement for the show. This seems like the entire purpose, but I guess that remains to be seen. We still have a few years to really see how things unfold in that regard in real life. But in the world of the show, The Rock isn't declaring victory just yet. He's being very careful about this, but that leads us into our flashbacks, as you mentioned, and we start in 1982 with young Dewey, of course, in Hawaii.
So things are starting to look up for the Johnson family, it seems here. Rocky's about to hit the road with the WWF and, hopefully become a star, and Dewey wants to join him. But as we know, the road is no place to raise a child, especially someone as impressionable as Dewey. And it's time for him to become the man of the house, so to speak. But unfortunately, a 10-year-old can't watch after everyone. And some members of the family, namely Leah, find themselves in some big, big trouble.
I felt so bad for Ada here after having just made that huge sacrifice and giving up on her dream for her son. And her son just wants to get the hell out of there and go on the road with his dad. Like at that point, I'd just be feeling like, maybe I can still call Star Search.
Well, Ada's not the fun parent. She lays down the law. So of course he's going to want to go where Rocky is. It's his dad. It's his role model. He just wants to have fun with the guys on the road.
Yeah, that's a lesson that Dewey has to learn a little bit later in life, that Ada's going to be the one that is always there for him, no matter what. And, his dad's very supportive of him, of course, but, his dad is just going to be gone for extended periods of time. And he is not going to be there and is not going to be the person to always help him out when he needs it and pick up the pieces when he's going through hard times. That's going to be Ada. Ada is going to be his rock. Literally, the Rock's rock. So I think that that's a nice moment here. We get, of course, eventually Dewey has the talk with Rocky, and Rocky's talking about, you really have to be the man of the house, watch after your mom and your grandma. And then we have that moment with Ada and Dewey where Dewey wants to stay and be with her, which is a nice moment. And I always love the Ada and Dewey moments. But I feel like that's not something that he will fully grasp until at the very earliest 87.
Right. Right here, it's just, well, Dad told me I have to stay with Mom, and I'm going to do what he says. But honestly, I don't know about you, I'd rather stay in sunny Hawaii hanging out at the beach than traveling in a random Cadillac and staying in questionable motels with Rocky.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be out making the towns in the 80s with Rocky Johnson, because there's just a lot that comes with that would not be very child-friendly for Dewey, and probably would not be very fun. I mean, being backstage at a wrestling show would be awesome, of course, but he'll have plenty of opportunities to do that over the course of his life. So Dewey making the decision, of course, to stay with Ada, which gave us a nice moment between them.
And this is actually a nice parallel to the premiere, the first episode, where they're all hanging out at Leah's place and the guys are all going to go out. The wrestlers are all going to go out and do stuff. And Dewey wants to go hang out with them, but he's forced to stay back with Ata. He doesn't want to be with Mom. He wants to be out like on the town with his dad and his friends.
Right, and we got a similar kind of scene with all of the wrestlers on the beach. Everyone was back for the finale. We had all of that 80s wrestling gang there. So yeah, the parallel is definitely there, and it's nice to see that progression from the pilot to the finale of season 1. And, you know, it goes to show you that even though it feels like young Dewey didn't have as much, certainly not as much as the older Dwaynes, and definitely not as much as 90s Dwayne, you know, he still did have some character growth over the course of the season, and Rocky as well, I think.
Oh, Rocky for sure. We see him grow so much, even if it's just him, like, not working the gimmick so much.
You know who I feel like maybe didn't have as much character growth as maybe a stunted growth is Leah, because she seems to just be regressing into this horrific mob-like figure.
Yeah, so here we finally see she's going to collect her tribute fee from Yao, but it is light. And so she threatens him, bang, bang, if he doesn't come through with the money. But unbeknownst to her, the FBI is recording this. And right before she's going to go into the Rocky's going away party, she gets arrested by the FBI for extortion.
And she doesn't even bat an eye.
No, she's just a grandma.
When the FBI rolls up, she is just, you're not gonna, you got nothing on me, you're not gonna get away with this, and like puts her hands out for the cuffs. She doesn't even bat an eye. This woman is ice cold. And I just feel so bad for Bob to have to be along for this ride with her, because he just wants to help.
I love Bob here trying to save her by shoving the cake in the FBI's face or whatever. And he just fails spectacularly because Leah can't run away because she's wearing flip-flops.
You know, Bob has been a great sidekick over the course of this season. One of my favorite recurring lines is whenever Leah tells him to get the car. That's one of my favorite things. But, you know, she just needs to chill out with this bang bang business. But as we now know from The Rock, bang bang were her last words.
Yeah, this is a tough lady. She takes no crap from anyone, even the FBI.
I wonder if that's where Cactus Jack got it from. Speaking of Leah, The Rock quote tweeted one of your live tweets that you put out while we were watching the episode when it was airing. And he had a lot to say.
He gave us a little more insight into his grandmother. He says, well, for starters, my sweet grandmother was brought on extortion charges from the FBI, which we saw in the show. Bang, bang were her final words. She beat the rap, but the feds came back around and seized all assets. She was homeless 2 years later. Crazy story. So I imagine we'll get more of that in season 2, because we don't really see much of Leah after, you know, she gets deported. We know she gets deported, but what's going on there? And
we do see a little bit of that when she's on the phone with Bob in 1994 later in this episode. And she's just, you know, Bob is, he's working at the Bank of Hawaii at that point. And she's just asking, what's your job? Do you have any enemies? Chill.
I'm like, girl, you just got out. You just got into the country again. Please.
Do you have any enemies? Bob's like, oh yeah, they run it like a family. It's like I have some brothers and sisters. Who is your least favorite sister? Chill out.
Can you calm down? They're gonna get you again if you don't stop. You already have a history.
She's got something else entirely going on. Even in 88, she was talking to Dewey. They're trying to deport me, Dewey. The feds are criminals. Bob, say aloha, you know, on the phone. Like, it's just...
And that's like 6-7 years later, and she's still dealing with this stuff. So what is going on with her? There's so much we don't see.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to see how that all unfolds in season 2, and that's something that they've definitely left open to continue and expand on in season 2. So definitely expect more of that. More of Leah's legal troubles.
That's a whole series.
Really, it could have been. Before we leave 82, though, I just wanted to, again, circle back to, we did see all the wrestlers again, and I was glad. And one of my favorite lines from this episode was the Iron Sheik when he was on the beach. And he goes, "I stole recipe from old family enemy." So many people with enemies in this show.
There's something going on here. But yeah, so the wrestlers don't get to do a lot here, but I'm happy to see them all the same because they're always just a joy on the screen.
Yeah, we got some little moments here. I was happy to see Afa and Sika's photography hobby. And
Macho Man's here.
Yeah, Macho Man was there. I know Rocky was talking about teasing him with this future poster that he was gonna tell him that he was from the future and really freak him out. I would have loved to have seen a scene of that.
Season 2.
82 is always fun. Always love to see those wrestlers. So I'd be interested to see, do we get into 83? Because, as the wrestling business starts to march towards the mid 80s, things start to get a lot more interesting. So I'd be very excited to see if we start to shift the years up a few in season 2. I'd be interested to see how they play with the timeline. So many question marks. How are they going to do Bradley's character? So many things to consider when going into season 2. But speaking of Bradley's character, let's shift it over now to 88 because we weren't in 87 for this episode. There was a year jump here.
We skipped ahead to his junior year.
Right.
So here, Dwayne's kind of finding his groove in Bethlehem playing football. I think this is kind of making him a little more popular as we see him hanging out with the Karens. But as college scholarships and recruiters start to roll in, he realizes that there's one school he hasn't heard from, the University of Miami. So some guts and one quick phone call, which is actually an aggressive phone call, to the recruiter begins to change everything for him.
That's a huge turning point. And really, it's like a small glimpse of the character of The Rock, that kind of brash, braggadocious character, those traits coming out in 1988 in Teen Dwayne. And that's a turning point in his life. So he's got to, at that point, realize, behaving like this gets me somewhere.
And this is another thing that somewhat matches up with his book. He does talk about this in the book. He says, when it became apparent that I had somehow completely escaped Miami's radar, I decided to find out what had happened. And he calls them up and he asks the recruiter if the University of Miami had heard something bad about him that was stopping them from reaching out to him. He's not as aggressive in this phone call, according to the book. So I think he's embellishing a little in the show. But I mean, they said, we'll reach out to you. Coach Carm calls him shortly after, doesn't offer a scholarship. We talked about this in a previous episode about possibly Dwayne getting a full ride. They're paying out of their own pocket for this.
Well, that puts even more pressure on him to succeed. And we see what happens in the 90s portion of this episode. Of course, we know from real life, but man, that's a lot of weight on your shoulders at that age. But at this point, still in 88, we're still at the point where Dwayne is leveling up. Who also leveled up in 88? Gabe, because his hair looks a lot better in 1988, that's for sure.
That's called growth.
But speaking of, we see Gabe and a bunch of other 88 characters. I was glad to see everyone back in this college football advice montage where we get to see everyone weighing in on which college he should accept admission to. And I loved Diane's suggestion, particularly. It's the Georgia Bulldogs, followed up by, do you remember the time you stole my dog purse?
She does not forget.
Just showing the randomness of, first of all, why would Diane even be talking to him about this? Because this is literally my only interaction with you is you stealing my dog purse.
Well, maybe they've grown closer over the past, few months or year or whatever, however long it's been. What really got me is he's getting advice from the 3 Karens about football. What team should he go to?
Yeah. The Karens, they seem to be very receptive to him, especially, Bonnie. She randomly just knows a lot about college football. So they're very interested in where he winds up going.
But my question is, now we find out here that it has been a year since he lied to Karen, and they have not, fine-ass Karen, of course, since he lied to fine-ass Karen, and she still won't talk to him. So my question is, why aren't the other Karens shunning him for what he did to her?
Yeah, it seems like maybe they have minds of their own, which would completely go against the whole idea of having a stable in high school, having a faction, because it's kind of a groupthink type of thing. But no, they have their own individual personalities and thoughts and opinions. So glad to see it. I love the Karens. I'm glad that we got to wrap up the Karens for the season. And I definitely hope that we see them in some capacity in season 2, because I really enjoyed them.
Well, someone wants to go to prom with him.
Yeah, big hair Karen. But as we mentioned there, Karen, she hasn't talked to Dwayne for a whole year. This fine-ass Karen, of course, not to be confused. That seems a bit extreme.
I think she feels betrayed. And, she's also, she's rich. He's poor. What's the point? She probably doesn't find any value in talking to him at this point.
I guess with the high school pecking order, she really does have no choice but to do the stereotypical thing and date Kevin, that Rudy Poo candy ass. And we hate Kevin.
Kevin.
We hate him. So... I'm surprised that he didn't get in Dwayne's face there when he confronted Karen in the classroom.
He knows what'll happen. What I'm surprised is that Kevin let Karen back into his life, because she specifically started going out with Dwayne because he punched Kevin.
It's one of those things in high school where there's just a pecking order with the popular kids. Like, who else is he going to go out with? One of the other Karens? Like, come on. I don't even think they're interested in him. I think they have higher standards than that.
I'm surprised, I guess, that the pastor's son is so popular. That feels like something that wouldn't happen.
I don't know. Bethlehem seems like kind of small town-ish. Maybe it's like a Footloose situation. The pastor's daughter was kind of the it girl. So really, though, the main crux of this 88 scene, this whole segment, was Dwayne and his football endeavors. And Dwayne makes the promise that he's going to be successful and go to the NFL, and he's making some power moves. His next power move, though, is to keep the Miami coaches waiting, which, of course, works out in his favor because they kind of love it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, how mad would you be if you were stuck waiting for an hour only to find out that this guy has just been at the gym this whole time, and you were not subjected, it wasn't bad, but to listening to Ada perform Creedence Clearwater Revival songs on the ukulele.
Coach O was having a great time. Yeah, he loves him some Fogerty.
That's fair.
I think with their personalities, I feel like, yeah, of course that would work out in Dwayne's favor. He keeps them waiting. It's the power move. He's learning the art of the power move, and it seems like a working the gimmick type of learned behavior from Rocky almost.
Well, yeah, I imagine if you're around that kind of personality, and not just Rocky, just all of the wrestlers, it's bound to rub off on you eventually.
I also loved Ada's line of, I like that Coach O. He's like a mix of my mom and Macho Man.
And Rocky just talking about how thick he is. It made me so uncomfortable.
Yes, well, in 1988, I think the word thick has more of a different connotation to it than in 2021.
I know, but I'm just
he's not going thick with 2 C's. I don't. At least I don't think. Not in that way. I don't think he means it.
That's all I could think of, though, and I was just like, why?
Speaking of thickness, let's move over. I hate that transition, but let's move over. What a segue. Let's move over to 1994. College Dwayne and Rocky doing a little lat check at the gym in the mirror, which was just completely ridiculous. But let's run it down here because I wrote down all of the different one-liners that they got in. It starts off with Rocky going, looks like a cobra's head. And then Dwayne goes, if I get any more swole, they're going to need bigger mirrors. And then Rocky follows up with, could cover a small village from the rain. And then Dwayne goes, I think I'm finally stronger than Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, which is a very weird point of reference for him at this point in his life. And then Rocky closes out this wonderful lat pose down with, gotta turn my head just to see the range on these babies. This was ridiculous. just a level of self-obsession that only these two could have.
This was perfect for this episode because in 1982, we see the two of them at the gym, and here we end it again with them at the gym. And of course, the gym played such a vital role in 1988. So I like that storytelling here.
But I'm glad that they did have this moment because the rest was pretty painful with this NFL draft scene.
Yeah, so Dwayne's college football days might be over, but he still has high hopes for himself. You know, he's putting in the work. We see him at the gym. He's certain that some NFL team is going to come calling. But after 2 days of the draft and no phone call, his confidence is pretty shot at this point.
Yep, he doesn't even get that jersey with 249 on it. He gets nothing. He completely feels like he's let everyone down. And it's the type of sadness where he's not even sad for himself. He's sad for his family.
And this is something that I talked about in the last episode. When Dwayne's name is never called, we get this. It's just Uli's eyes are so expressive. He doesn't have to say anything. He doesn't need to do anything else, but you can just see his eyes are starting to look a little red. It looks like he's going to tear up. And it's so subtle, but it works. And I feel so bad, even though, of course, we all know how life is going to turn out for him. We know he's going to get everything he wants, but I feel so bad for him still.
It did, however, lead to another great Ada and Dewey moment with Ada disappearing for a while, and you think that she's just so upset, but she comes back with the ukulele, and she gives it to Dwayne as a way to keep his family close on his journey because she knows that he's going somewhere. She has that kind of faith in him, and at this point, he's still, I'm not going anywhere. But then suddenly he gets that call from the Calgary Stampeders, and they want him to come and join their team for the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, I really loved this scene. It felt so weird and out of place when he gets to go to Canada. Like, they were presenting Canada as some, like it's Antarctica or something like that. It's some, remote place. And it's like, Canada's just, from where we live, Canada's just a few hours away. It's not like some outrageous place. But I guess if you've lived the majority of your life in these hot, sunny places like Florida and Hawaii, Canada's probably pretty rough.
It's a very different experience going to Canada from sunny Miami, Florida. But they did make it look like Santa Claus called him to come play football at the North Pole or something like that. It was very dramatic, but I liked that. I liked some of the production touches, especially in the 94 segments. I really liked the way they shot the NFL draft scene with Cream by Wu-Tang Clan playing over the montage. It reminded me a lot of Check Your Head, which is one of my standout episodes of the season. So there was a lot of great stuff going on in this segment here.
You have Leah again, her priorities when it comes to football standing out as being, what's that mascot?
Yeah.
She's so concerned about the mascots.
Yeah, she probably wants to put out a hit on the mascot or something.
She's going to put a hit out on every coach who doesn't pick him, I feel like.
Yeah.
This is what she was born to do.
From there, from the low lows of rejection, we get this really beautiful ending that I liked a lot. And we don't have the results of the election. We did not get that far. So I guess that's just the cliffhanger they're leaving us on. But what they did leave us on, I think, was much more important than that. That is a beautiful moment between The Rock and the real Ada Johnson appearing in this episode. And I just thought that everything about this was so genuine and very nice. And I thought that it was really great to see her. Of course, we saw her via satellite in a prior episode, but to see her on screen with The Rock playing this scene out in a very genuine way, I thought it was the perfect way to cap off this season.
Yeah, so here the cameras are off, so to speak. He's not being interviewed anymore. He's just feeding pigeons on his headquarters property. And I think this is when we get the closest look at who The Rock really is as a person. We're so used to this, highly, and this is a manufactured version of him for sure, but we're so used to when he's always on. But I think this moment outside with him, his mom, and the pigeons, I think this is the realest version of him we've ever seen, period. In all of, not just on the show, ever with him.
This could have been an election clincher right there.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't have voted for him after seeing this? But of course, this happens when, like you said, the cameras are off. But I think that this was just done in such a nice way. And I loved when they were in the elevator together. And then you see in the reflection of the elevator, you see Adrian and Stacy's reflections as young Dewey and Ada. I loved that. It tied everything together to the point where even if this show didn't get a second season, this almost felt like the perfect series finale. It was the right emotion and the right moment, I thought. So I really enjoyed this. And I know that a lot of people were very misty-eyed during this scene.
Yeah, and this scene, it wasn't entirely scripted. When they're sitting with the pigeons, The Rock asks her about his dad, and she didn't know that was coming. And she has and Ada has a really real reaction to that. So she has to like take a beat. So that's why I think this is probably maybe the best scene of the whole show, because it feels so authentic, because it kind of is.
Yeah, I do like that we really got to see some genuine emotion from Ada, and of course from The Rock in turn. It was just nice if it's a nice tribute to Rocky. And just this is what made the show, for me, in my mind, worth it. Putting a spotlight on Ada Johnson and what a great, strong mother that she has been for this man who just dominates entertainment. And the driving force behind him is this woman right here. And I really love that this show put a spotlight on that. But I really do love that about this show. And I think that's something that we'll discuss a little bit more next episode when we do a season wrap up for Young Rock season 1. But before we get out of here, Tessa, what did you think overall just about this episode, and how did it leave you feeling coming out of this first season?
This was a really strong episode, much like the pilot. I think when they're able to cohesively tell a story between all four eras, 2032, 1982, 1987, between 1990 and 94, I think that's when it really shines. You get to see everybody. They all get to stand out. You know, everybody got their bits in, I think, in this episode. And this, more than ever, I'm just sitting there like, okay, but did he win? Is he going to win the election?
Right. It also just leaves a question. Yeah. I like leaving a season with questions because it makes me want to tune in for that next season. It makes me excited, gives me something to pontificate on, and leaves you with all sorts of theories. And that's the suspense that you have in between seasons of a television show is one of my favorite things about watching television shows. If we wrapped up everything with a nice little bow and there were no questions, okay, season over. I'm glad that we do leave the season with those questions because it makes me that much more excited for season 2.
But I also feel that if they hadn't been renewed and it was just going to be this one season, I think this was a really good ending.
For sure. I strongly agree with that. I think just in general, I think that this was just a great series finale for the show. I thought it was even stronger than the pilot. Yeah. Mainly being that the 90s portion with Uli, that got a lot more focus than it did in the pilot. The pilot, it was just like almost like a 2-minute teaser of what we would come to expect. And that being the strongest portion of the show, I think it was great that got a lot of the focus in this episode. So I thought it was a very strong episode. I thought it was a very strong finale, and there's just a lot of momentum, I feel, building towards season 2. So I am very curious to see where they go with each time period and how much ground they cover and what years they cover. I guess we'll theorize about all of that in the next episode when we do our season 1 wrap up and recap. But for now, I think it's time where we can finally talk about our future plans that will happen a little bit more immediately than our coverage of Young Rock season 2. That is way on the horizon because they haven't even filmed anything yet. But we, as I mentioned, we have officially renewed ourselves for a second season of this podcast. And season 2 of Pro Wrestling Repackaged is going to be dedicated to wrestlers on sitcoms. So we're not veering too far from season 1 covering Young Rock. We're just doing a bit of an extension of that. Of course, we covered The Rock on That 70s Show along with the Hardy Boys and Ken Shamrock. But season 2 is going to be exclusively dedicated to wrestler guest appearances on sitcoms, something that I think we're going to have a lot of fun with.
I'm really excited for that because sitcoms are my favorite.
Yes. We're going to do 6 episodes plus a couple of bonus episodes. The first episode will be released the first week of June, and we will release weekly episodes leading, of course, up to our third season covering heels. So definitely a lot to look forward to on that horizon. And we very much look forward to taking a look at some other wrestlers and their guest appearances on sitcoms, or in some cases, having their own sitcom, much like The Rock. But that's going to do it for this episode of Pro Wrestling Repackaged, but season 1 isn't over yet. Join us next week for our Young Rock season 1 recap and wrap up. But thank you so much for listening and being with us for our coverage of Young Rock season 1. And we hope that you will join us next time and next season.
Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at PWRepackaged and email us at pwrepackaged@gmail.com.
Subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. And visit pwrepackaged.crd.co for links to everything.
If you'd like to support the show, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or any other platform that features reviews.
Pro Wrestling Repackaged is a Multitrack Minds production. Visit multitrackminds.com for projects and audio production services by yours truly.